All right, all right. Welcome everybody to the live cast. I'm joined today by my guest, Dan Willig, who I'm super excited to talk to about online user experience, user testing tools. And we will get to that in just a minute or two. Before we do that, I'm going to give you a couple of quick items, digital items in the news, as we usually do. And then we will get to Dan. So, I just keep hearing more and more about the companies that have done the right things and are benefiting from this increasingly digital world that we're in. Nobody wants to benefit from COVID in the sense of nobody would wish it on us. But what it's really done is it's pushed consumers to be more and more digital in how they shop and deal with financial services and just about everything that they do. And well, frankly, there are some companies that were ready and were set up well to take advantage of it because they've been putting the right things in place for years. And well, we're seeing some of those. Obviously, we're seeing some companies really struggle because they're not able to adapt quickly enough. And we're seeing some that are really successful. So I always like to focus on those that are successful first, because I figure those are the models we all need to be looking to. So one that I'm excited about, Bed Bath & Beyond, a store that I'm always a little nervous walking around in there because I'm afraid I'm going to break things. There's a lot of glassware and stuff, but I think that's just my own thing. But they are doing great, and in a time when so many retailers are struggling, they just reported that their same store sales numbers, and in most retail stores they look at same store year-over-year numbers, right? Because obviously if a store is new or it's been there a long time, or in different markets, it's going to be different. But they look at for same store for comparing each store to itself a year earlier. How are they doing? And for the first time in 4 years, Bed Bath & Beyond is reporting that same store sales have increased. So obviously so many retailers have been struggling the last number of years, a competition from Amazon and other online retailers. And now we see Bed Bath & Beyond in this time. What a time to all of a sudden be pulling out of a challenging time. And of course, no doubt it's aided by the fact that we're all home a lot more than we ever were before. So, well, we got more time in bed, maybe, I don't know, more time in our bath. And what we're not doing is going beyond, right? We're staying home. But no, I mean, clearly people are spending more time nesting, taking care of their homes, since they're spending more and more time there. And so clearly that was an advantage to Bed Bath & Beyond in this time. And nevertheless, though, it didn't have to be them, right? People could have been ordering that stuff from Amazon or other places. So congratulations to them. They actually say that their online business is up more than 80% this quarter, which absolutely makes sense. Of course, that's where you'd expect the growth to be. And clearly they were ready to do a good job in that online area because it enabled them to really take advantage. And furthermore, they're taking advantage of another strength that they have, because Bed Bath & Beyond has a lot of retail presence. And they are now just announced that they are getting ready to roll out nationwide same-day delivery from Bed Bath & Beyond stores. So I think that makes a lot of sense for a company like that has a lot of retail locations at a time when, so many people are hesitant to go to the store, but also when you're competing with online retailers who can give you the added convenience of not having to drive anywhere, and then to be able to use your local presence to be able to make same-day delivery, perhaps more cost-effective than it would be for, let's say, an online retailer of similar products that would have to ship via UPS or FedEx. In fact, they're doing that same-day delivery program in a partnership with Instacart and Shipt. So finding partners who are good at that last mile delivery and taking advantage of that. So that's awesome. I'm really excited. And I know, what we're all about, what I'm all about in really everything I do is working with like these great legacy brands and figuring out how they can adapt to be successful in this new digital world. So I'm always thrilled to find good examples of that. And one more example, that is Nike. Nike has perhaps also positioned in an area set to benefit from this changed world that we're living in, because we are, the whole world of anything to do with home exercise has done very well, as people can't go to their gyms. And so Nike, obviously, not only apparel, but also in their digital world, they have a whole app for tracking runs and things like that. And they made a big move. They decided to make what was formerly a subscription program free, and that resulted in a 200% increase in downloads of their apps. But that's also led to very significant growth in their online commerce, both through the app. So one thing that Nike announced this week is that they had already, they added 900 million in incremental revenue over last year in their digital channels. So their digital channels are up 900 million compared to where they were last year. Their actual revenue for the year is down 1%. And it makes sense because during COVID, apparel in general has been very hard hit. You know, we're not going out as much. Obviously, we're not going out to shop, but we're not going out as much in general. So buying new clothes, people not going to the gym, they don't need that, you know, fancy new gym outfit or whatever else. So Nike's revenue is down 1%, but their net income, their profit is up 11% to 1.5 billion. So somehow during these times, even though they saw a drop in revenue, they saw an increase in net revenue because so much of that new revenue was digital, the $900 million of incremental revenue from digital, where obviously their costs are lower. And one of the other things is Nike had previously announced a goal of wanting 30% of their revenue to be from digital channels by the year 2023. And with the things that have happened in the last 6 months, they are now at 30%. So the goal that they had set for 2023, as a result of the combination of the factors and circumstances of coronavirus, but combined with Nike's readiness to take advantage of the situation and the opportunity, meant that they have now met that goal 3 years early. So congratulations to them. And, you know, whenever I say take advantage of, I always feel a little funny because I don't mean to suggest that anybody is intentionally taking advantage of anyone's misery and suffering. But the reality is, you know, my view is the number one job of any business is to do the very best possible job it can in serving its customers. And when you're ready to adapt, when you're ready to change to changing times so that you can continue to serve your customers, even during a challenging time like that, well, you know, you're only doing more to fulfill your mission, your role, you know, for good in the world, so to speak. So no negative judgment at all. In fact, the contrary, great appreciation from me to those brands that are successfully adapting to make sure that they can continue to do a great job of serving their customers. And of course, it's great to see those brands that are doing that have positive financial results, because that's what's going to enable them to keep going. That's what's going to enable them to keep investing. And frankly, those are the examples that hopefully help other companies get the investment that they need. Because if you're at a company that's not been making the kind of investments that Bed Bath & Beyond or Nike or Taco Bell or Target or others that are doing well, and some of those we've talked about in prior live casts, these are some new recent examples that you can bring to your boss or your CEO or your board of directors and say, look, these investments are paying off. These companies that are adapting to be even more digitally relevant, digitally centric for this increasingly digital world we're living in, they're the ones that are succeeding. So, you know, those are the companies that are going to thrive in the future. Okay, so there's your digital transformation in the news. And with that, I want to welcome my colleague and friend, Dan Willig. Dan and I have worked together for, I want to say 7 years, maybe 8 years.
Yeah,
is that not?
I think about 7 now. Yeah.
Yeah. So our company joined together with another firm back then, and I got the opportunity to meet and start working with Dan, and he is awesome. And I want to let him introduce himself. I'll just say he runs our user experience practice at From, customer experience practice, and he's tremendously expert both at crafting great customer and user experiences, but also at customer research. And so I want to give him a chance, first of all, to introduce himself. But then once we've done that, we really want to talk today about something that's really interesting to me, which is new methods of doing customer research via remote tools, which of course is highly relevant now in the era of COVID. But Dan's been doing it long before COVID for a variety of reasons, which we'll get to. But first, Dan, why don't you just introduce yourself to everyone, let them know kind of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Hey, everybody. So I'm Dan Willig. As Howard said, I'm the director of user experience at From. And I've been working in this space for about 13 years now. And, in a former life was a design professor and information architect, we called ourselves back then, and was always really interested in usability research and customer research. And anyone who's worked in the design field knows that there are some certain companies where you really get lots of opportunities to do customer research and just get those that firsthand customer insight into how people are using a product, how they're experiencing it. But more often than not, you don't get those opportunities. And I remember going to design conferences years ago, and that was my main question to people was, how do I get my organization to do more testing for our clients and for ourselves. And I'm just really fortunate to have been working at From, where that's kind of like a big deal for us. We're always real big advocates of usability testing, any kind of user testing. We don't want to design things in a vacuum. The more feedback that we get on our ideas, the better we can make them by iterating on them and testing again.
Yeah, Dan, I couldn't agree more. For anyone who's listening who might not know exactly what we mean, the word testing can mean a lot of things, right? It can mean testing the performance of something or testing to make sure features work. I know what you're talking about when you talk about user testing, but can you just explain to everybody the type of thing, whether it's remote or not, but what are the types of things you're looking for? And essentially, what is it? If somebody goes, user testing, what the heck is that?
Yeah, sure. So, whenever you want to sort of test an idea, whether that is looking at your existing website or mobile application, a kiosk at a museum, really anything, you can do user testing. That it's one of the best ways to get feedback. Of course, you can also look at analytics and things like that, but you can. But by doing user testing, you actually have the opportunity to sit and hear from people what their experience is like. And by observing them go through specific tasks, you can see points where they're experiencing some sort of friction, meaning is there something that's slowing them down or making the experience of getting from point A to point B a little bit more difficult than you intended or than it should be. And I'm saying you intended, you might be doing this on your own products, but you might be looking at competitors' things as well. That can be really helpful, is to watch someone use a few of your competitors' different tools and see how they're doing with it. There might be things to learn from that.
Yeah.
So it's really a great tool in any designer's toolkit.
I've watched a lot, just watching some of the sessions you've run where you'll sit down with someone and give them a task and say, hey, go on this website and try to rent a car, or use this tool to set up to run your payroll, or, here's an e-commerce site, go buy a gift for a 9-year-old girl, or whatever it may be. And just as you just sit back and observe their attempt to use the product, and I don't know about you. One of my biggest challenges is always like not help them. Inevitably people are challenged. They're like, they can't figure out. They look at you. They're like, where's the search? I can't find the search. Or do they even sell? Or is there even a gift wrapping option available? Or whatever the questions are. And you have to be like, I can't tell you that. I'm trying to see whether you can figure it out. And just watching people. And gosh, sometimes I'm amazed. Sometimes people wind up like almost wanting to hit their heads against the screens in frustration sometimes, or throw their phones at the floor on sites that are major sites. But you just give someone a task and you watch them try to go through it, and you hit all these areas where people are just really frustrated. And man, to me, that's the gold when you find that.
That's right. And, not only is it great for things like that, where you're looking at sort of existing experiences, but it can also be really helpful when you're trying to think about where to go next with your business. So, maybe you have a few ideas of things that are like, oh, these are going to really make a big difference for my customers. Before you go and build that whole thing and spend potentially years and lots of money investing in it, you can very quickly generate some prototypes and through simple user testing, get some feedback on just the general viability of those ideas.
Yeah, and what I know I've heard you tell me before, and always remains with me, is this idea that you can ask people what they think of something, but then you're asking them to be like a designer. You're asking them to be some kind of expert. Is this a good product? But when you ask people to use something, even if it's a prototype, then you really see what their ability to use it is. You would get to really see if it works. Instead of asking their opinion, you're just seeing their experience. And that's just so much more useful, and very often just more accurate too.
That's right. And there's just so many tools out there these days that really enable you to do that. And we're kind of fortunate that we have been sort of dabbling in this area for quite some time now, and really had a leg up when everything went remote, because we'd been playing with so many tools. We kind of knew what the pitfalls were and things to watch for as we move forward.
Yeah, well, let's get to that. I want to tee it up by saying, when you and I first started work together, I think at that time, pretty much 100% of the user research we would do would be in a facility, right? We would either bring someone into our offices, or we would go, if we needed to do it in another city, we might be at a market research facility, or sometimes we'd rent a meeting room at a hotel, and we'd have people signed up to come in every hour, and we'd say, hey, we want to learn about your use of this website or this app or whatever else. And we would sit with them and we'd give them these tasks. And man, like so valuable, as we talked about before. And then I started to hear about, and then I know we sometimes discovered that we would do it like by a Zoom or WebEx or something like that, just because of cost. It would be like, well, gosh, we need to talk to people in 10 different cities. We could fly a team to 10 different cities, but that adds a lot of cost. So we'll take a little bit of reduction in the fidelity by just being able to sit in one place and connect to people over Zoom. And also it can be easy to recruit people because they don't have to drive somewhere. They can just do it from their homes. But I always felt that wasn't quite as good as sitting with people, but on the other hand was, a heck of a lot more convenient. But then you and your team started to do this new type of stuff, and maybe it's not that new now, but where you started to do using these user testing platforms. And this is really what I want to get you to talk about. And I want to make a confession, which is, man, when I started to hear about this, I'm like, because these platforms, you sign people up and they go off, it's sort of semi-automated, and I want to let you talk about it. But when I heard about it, I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't sound to me like, I was a real skeptic, I admit. It's a funny thing, in my book, I talk a lot about resistance to change and how people can be resistant to change. Well, I got to admit, I got some of my own resistance to change, when knowing that sitting with people is so effective, to be like, can it really work when you have the other models? But I know that your team has been using it super effectively with a lot of clients, and that you have experienced a lot of advantages. So I guess, hey, it just goes to show that sometimes an old guy is resistant to adopt something new that's what, is working. But can you just explain, I think we've given a good picture of like classic user testing and how that works when you sit with somebody and more or less just observe them using your tools or your products and learn from that. Can you just talk a little bit about the methods that you've used for remote? First of all, just explain what they are in case people might not have a concrete understanding of what are these different tools and fundamentally how do they work, just on a practical level when you want to gather data with them.
Sure. So to start, whenever I'm talking about doing remote usability testing, or just any kind of user customer research at all, I like to split it into two groups: moderated and unmoderated. So a lot of kind of what you've been teeing up and talking about are unmoderated, but yeah, you also gave a nod to the moderated as well, which is basically, you set up a schedule to talk to someone, and through Zoom or GoToMeeting or WebEx, you can just get on the phone with someone and share links with them, have them walk through things, share their screen, and talk about their experience. It's great. It has a lot of the benefits of that in-person user testing in the sense that it's conversational. If someone is doing something, you can ask them what they're thinking at that point, and ask them how they felt after they completed a certain task or weren't able to complete a task. Ask them a little bit about what their expectations were if they were to go to this other area of the experience that maybe you're testing a prototype and you haven't fully fleshed out yet. You can really dig into some of those meaty details, and it's great. You're seeing the physical cues of the body language. If you're able to do the screen sharing, they're really easy to schedule. So I can talk to someone in California, and then 10 minutes later, I can be on the phone with someone in Michigan. And, there's that consistency of the moderator that, sometimes when we do have to, when the in-person is the only solution, we will have to sort of break up the team, and, different people will be moderating different sessions, and, we'll get great results still, but they're without that consistency, you're getting a little bit of hearsay when you sit down and start to look at the data. It's like, so what exactly happened in this conversation? And, oh, did you happen to ask this follow-up question? Because I'm really curious about this. So there's a lot of benefits to the moderated for that. However, there are times when you need to talk to a lot of people, and that something like that isn't feasible. There may also be a real specific task that you're trying to get specific measurements on. And yes, you can do that through remote moderated testing. But there's a little bit of extra footwork here. To be done. And then that's where these unmoderated platforms come in. And by the way, you can use some of these unmoderated platforms for moderated testing as well, and take advantage of some of these sort of quantitative forms of measurement, which I'll talk about in a minute. But with unmoderated testing, essentially what you do is create a script for the type of thing that you want for what it is you're trying to test, all tied back to your goals, your business goals for this product, and it can be an app, a website on desktop or tablet or mobile. You kind of set all the parameters up, and different tools allow you to test on different things and have different quirks to them that we'll probably get to later. But
can you give an example of what you mean when you say a script? Like, what might a script for a given session look like?
Yes. So first, you just kind of introduce the experience that people are going to be having. Thanks for taking your time out of your schedule. We're going to be asking you a few questions to help us improve the experience of this blank site or app. And as you go through the series of tasks that we're going to give you, so it could be like, go purchase these tires, and when you're just about to enter your credit card data, stop, hit I'm finished. So that could be one task, and you'll oftentimes tell them in the script, we'll be capturing your audio and video as you're going through this process. So please remember to share your thought process, your frame of mind as you're going through the steps. Again, the big disadvantage of the unmoderated test is you're not there to probe and ask those questions. So it's helpful first to make sure that you're reminding people several points throughout the script, like remember to share your thoughts, because people forget. They're just kind of going through. They're very task oriented. Maybe your thing's working very well, and they're like excited to just finish. And in the process of that, they're forgetting to tell you what they're thinking about all of this. And you won't know that until you get the final video. So that's what the script is, and most of these platforms have user panels that you can recruit from. And these can be international, or some of the companies are really focused on a particular continent or region. It all depends. And what you can do is set up demographic controls. So I'm looking for men and women in the Northeast who own a car and have owned it for the past 2 years. So I can set all of that up, and then it'll look out at its user panel and only recruit those people who fit those criteria. And they will be the ones who get the link to go to my test. They click the link and boom, they go. It's fantastic. Now, one of the things, the great advantages of this is I could set up a test, get the script all set up, get the links in there either to a prototype. Usually it's like a web-based prototype on something like InVision or Marvel, or maybe like a live site or several sites. I can even set things like success criteria. So this task will be a success when people reach this URL. So by setting it up that way, it makes my analysis much easier. Because if I'm recruiting about 60 people for a study, watching the results of all of those videos in order to capture that information is really a lot. So there are these mechanisms in these tools that enable you to sort of quantify the actions of people. And then you can watch the videos for the qualitative findings, the things that people are sharing and saying throughout the experience that are also really important to know, because it explains the context of, okay, so people were failing on this task. Why is that? And then you can go back and watch a video that was captured during the experience and see what was happening on the screen, and in many cases, what their facial expression was throughout this. So getting that all set up, I can hit submit and literally have 60 videos in a matter of hours. Incredibly powerful, something where it would take probably a couple weeks for us to do that moderated, either remote or in person.
Well, yeah, you got to
So
schedule all the people, and you can't have two people at the same time, right? So then the next thing you know, you want to schedule this person, but someone else is already in that slot and all that. So now they could all be doing it overlapping. Doesn't matter.
that's right. That's right. You don't
Yeah.
have to schedule in lunch breaks or travel time or anything
Right.
like that. It's
Right.
really all taken care of for
Or
you.
sometimes then you'll have three that somebody will not show up, and then you're sitting there for an hour with nothing to do because your subject didn't show up. All those problems are eliminated. You just
That's right.
recruit
That's
however
right.
many you need.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. Those
Hmm.
no shows can be a killer, and it's always like really disappointing as the facilitator to have a no show. It's like, oh, what could we have done to really make sure people showed up for this?
Pay them more.
Um, yeah. Well, and that's another great thing about some of these tools is the incentives for that you pay the panelists to participate in these tend to be a bit lower than what we would pay people for a moderated remote or in-person session. So it can be cost effective in that way. Although with most of these tools, there is a barrier to entry with membership fee, and those can be pretty steep depending on what tool you're talking about.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, yeah, it makes sense because if you wanted to motivate somebody, I mean, very often we'll pay someone $75, $100, or sometimes more to come to an in-person session, but we're asking them to travel, come to us, right? So even if it's a 45-minute session, how much of it is out of their day? It might be, I don't know, depending on how far they live, right? Another 45 minutes or something coming and going. Whereas here, it's nothing more, right? Just like any kind of like a Zoom, right? And furthermore, with the unmoderated, they can do it whenever they want, right? So they don't even have to plan it. They can just do it whenever it's convenient.
That's exactly right. It's really very flexible, and one of the disadvantages that I kind of alluded to earlier is you don't have that you don't have that conversational aspect, so you're not able to sort of dig into some of the details. So it's really helpful when you're sort of setting up the study, and I always recommend launching a pilot test or two to just sort of see how people are going through the tasks. Sometimes there's the way that you've worded a question is a little awkward and causing people to pause and they're not exactly sure what they're supposed to do. Maybe you're using jargon that they're not familiar with or something like that. So by looking at the pilot test, you can see that, but you can also get a sense of, well, if I was in the room with that person, what are the questions I would be asking them? And you have the opportunity to, at certain points in the script, add questions where you're asking them to answer multiple choice, rate things on a Likert
And then
scale.
they just speak, like they ask the question, and they're just like you and I are now, look at the camera and answer it, or they're more like typing their answers, or either of those?
It's a mix. It's a mix. And if you're doing a larger study, what we will often try to do is really try to use those automated mechanisms when we can, because again, it makes the analysis much quicker if we're
Right.
able to just have the system do it for us rather than listen to 60 people tell their answers. Where we can set these things up in such a way where we're still getting to the results without having to watch every video in every case. Although we will still watch every video, but we'll know going into it sort of the types of things to expect.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard you mention this number 60 a few times. Obviously, the number of subjects we do on our test does vary depending on, how many segments and all that. But usually it's not 60, right? I mean, usually if you do in-person tests, in my experience, you wind up with 15, 25, 60 would be quite a big one. So is part of it that you wind up being able to essentially have a larger sample of people as a result of this?
Yes, that's right. Because of the incentives and the time, you are able to really get great numbers-based results. Statistically significant findings can come from these types of studies, which is fantastic, and a bit of a limitation with other methods. Although there are pros and cons to each.
Yeah. And does this work just as well if you're testing something that's on a mobile device as if it's something that's in like a laptop browser?
Well, that all depends. Some tools do this better than others. For example, we recently were using one tool where we had been doing mobile testing on different types of responsive sites using another tool prior, and it was fantastic. It worked just like the desktop experience. You know, you're listening to the audio captured by people. You don't have the benefit of getting the camera once they start sharing their screen in that, but it's okay. You can still sort of go through all of that, and it records everything. But I'm newer to one of these remote user testing tools, and we had an experience where we got the videos back, and it turns out it's not recording the entire duration of the study. It only records between the tasks. So, for example, if I say, go through the reservation process on this hotel website, and when you get to the confirmation page, share your thoughts on the page. So we set that up in the study. We set the confirmation page as the place for the system to record that was a successful task. And then we're asking them, all right, look at the page and share your thoughts about it. So the recording would start at the beginning of the task, and then they get to the confirmation page, and then it cuts off right when we're waiting for them to share their thoughts about that page. And then it goes right to the next task. So that was, that was kind of rough.
Lesson learned.
Yeah, that was a learn. And really unexpected. Why they set it up that way, I don't know.
Well, let's transition. I know we're nearly out of time, but I know we're not trying necessarily to do a head-to-head comparison of every product on the market during this live cast, but could you share a little bit about what are some of the products that you have worked with? And, I'm sure that they vary in strengths and weaknesses, but can you give us a quick, whatever's top of mind in terms of what you think at least some of their strengths are?
Yeah, so for these tools where you have the option to do the unmoderated, we've used quite a few at this point. Usertesting.com was really the one we started with, and really loved them. They were kind of the gold standard, and we worked with several clients using that tool. The big downside to that is at a certain point they realized how good they were, and they were able to really jack their prices up significantly. So I can't remember the specific number, but it's like $13,000 for an annual membership, which let's face it, some companies can afford and some just can't. So then that's when we started to really dabble in some of these other tools. We've been using Validately for years. I'm a really big fan of Validately. They also have an annual membership fee, but it's a little bit more palatable and great testing panel. Had a lot of great experiences with that. We've just started using UserZoom a bit. They're really great at setting the tasks, lots of different types of tasks and units of measure that you can use for these things. So that's pretty promising as well. But we've started to look more into utility tools where you actually don't have to pay that annual membership and can just go month to month,
pay as you go,
and pay as you go, which is looking promising, and I think probably the way of the future. As I'm looking around it for the past couple of years, it was that it was the industry standard that everyone had a membership, an annual membership fee that you had to pay, and usually it was in bulk. And now I'm seeing more and more of these pay-as-you-go models coming up, and I think it's probably going to change the landscape.
Makes sense. And last question, you mentioned earlier about doing like a pilot. I'm assuming that's like if you're going to do an unmoderated, just do a couple users unmoderated, see how the results come back before you do 60, and then, for example, discover like the problem you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But can you talk, how does this fit into other types of testing? For example, are you putting together a whole larger protocol where you do some of this, but you also do some in-person, some moderated testing, or some in person, or some by Zoom? Or are you finding increasingly that this is so effective that you don't really need to combine it with other things? You're sort of leaning almost exclusively on doing these types of unmoderated tests.
Yeah. So as powerful as the unmoderated remote testing platforms are, there are some limitations, and there are just certain sorts of insights that you can garner from them, but it's going to take a lot of work, and maybe maybe you won't really answer some of the questions that you could have had you done real live moderated sessions, whether it's in person or remote. So as an example, if someone makes a certain sigh, or their body language is a certain way as they're going through a task, you could really see that they're experiencing some level of difficulty with a certain task. You aren't able to track things like that in unmoderated testing. And there's other examples where maybe you want to look at a whole bunch of competitor sites that all do the same task. They do it slightly differently. So I'll stick with hotels. So, the booking experience in different hotel sites, some might be 3 steps, some might be 4 steps. If I set up one of these moderated tests and I want a whole bunch of users, I can see, it took this long for people to get to the confirmation screen on this site, and that was 10 seconds longer than these other sites. So maybe they're doing something better. But what you're not really understanding from that data alone is what some of the psyche of the participants was, are the ones that took a little bit longer being sold more to actually complete that transaction and maybe keep that reservation. So those are the types of things that you can get a little deeper into when you're speaking with someone.
I'm curious, are any of them doing any kind of a sentiment analysis? Like in theory, one could use computer vision to be studying the facial expressions and actually tracking, at least with some level of accuracy, what emotional state someone's in. I don't know if have any of these platforms gotten that far, or is that not something that you've seen out there yet?
I have not seen that yet. I have seen, eye movement tracking and and things of that nature, but
also very valuable.
Yeah, very valuable.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, Dan. This has been fantastic. I'm sure we could keep talking about this for much longer. I have more questions, but I know normally we try to go 25, 30 minutes, and we're at 37 minutes. So I know our producer is going to be like, come on, guys, that's it. Time's up. So maybe we'll do a part 2 on this at another point in time, especially if we're getting more questions. For anyone who's watching the replay, if you have any questions for Dan about this topic, feel free to post them in the chat. We will try to get back to you either by text on the platform you posted your question, or perhaps address it in a future live cast, depending on the nature of the question. And by the way, my book, Winning Digital Customers, is coming out shortly. If you're not on our mailing list, you can get a free first chapter of the book at wdc.ht/free chapter. And the book has extensive information in it about different aspects of customer research, including user testing. Dan just gave you a lot of great insights that are not in the book, so that is fantastic. But there's a lot of other stuff there. So if you're interested in this topic, you might find that book useful. If you get the free chapter, we'll also make sure to let you know when the book's out and where you can get it at a special discount. So thanks, everybody. As a reminder, we'll be on again on Wednesday at 10 a.m. with another live cast. Want to especially thank my guest, Dan Willig, for being here. Thank you so much. And to all of you for watching, have an awesome day.
Thank you.